ये जिंदगी है कौम की, तो कौम पे लुटाए जा, कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा, खुशी के गीत गाए जा, ये जिंदगी है कौम की, तो कौम पे लुटाए जा.
Any discussion on the Indian mass movement or the Indian mass phase remains incomplete without the discussion of one name, of a name that still echoes in our hearts, and that is of Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose. The last video that you saw was the formation of INA and Netaji being involved in the functioning of the INA that was formed by him. So Netaji Subhas Chandra Bose was born in Cuttack on 23rd of January 1897. And he came to the forefront of the mass movement of the national struggle only after he had left his job of civil services. So the innate nationalistic fervor that we saw in Netaji in later years were in fact, in his heart from a very young age. So this zeal came from the time when Netaji was very young and he was a follower of Swami Vivekananda. So since childhood, Subhas Chandra Bose was greatly inspired by the words of Swami Vivekananda, who had stated and who had worked upon the nationalistic ideals of India. Now, the ideas and ideologies of nationalism that little Subhas Chandra Bose had was only, it came out when he grew older, and it was only a wait of time when this, fervor would ultimately implode. So we see that this is a picture of Subhas Chandra Bose as a child. So ultimately, when the Jallianwala Bagh massacre happened, as we have discussed earlier, as a protest, Subhas Chandra Bose left his service of the Indian Civil Services in 1921 as a protest against the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. And on 23rd April, after his resignation, he returned back to India from London. So he had gone to London to deliver his services, but came back after giving the resignation. Now, as soon as Subhash Bose came back to India, he came under the influence of Mahatma Gandhi, and he joined Congress, and soon we see Subhash Chandra Bose moving quite quickly upwards in the Congress because they realized his leadership mettle. So when he returned to India in 1921, Bose came under the influence of Gandhi and joined the Indian National Congress. Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose were also very closely placed because these were the two who had stated the very fact that India did not want only dominion status but wanted Purna Swaraj, and they moved ahead for the appeal of complete independence or Purna Swaraj in place of the dominion status. So both Subhash Chandra Bose and Jawaharlal Nehru were against the Congress' initial demand of a dominion status and pushed for the declaration of Purna Swaraj as the ultimate goal of Congress. Now, during this point of time, therefore, we see that Subhash Chandra Bose started to garner a lot of importance, and not only importance, but the masses started to, look up to him as a mass leader. This was at this point of time when Subhash Chandra Bose was gaining grounds in the Indian national politics and the mass movement. We see that in 1938 he becomes the president of the Congress session in Haripura. So Subhash Chandra Bose was elected as the president of the Congress session at Haripura in 1938. So let's see how exactly was the Haripura session.
51st session of the Congress met on the bank of the river Tapti at Haripura in rural surroundings under the stewardship of Subhas Chandra Bose, the youngest president in February 1938. After hoisting the national flag, President Subhas Chandra Bose said,
"Our struggle is no doubt a non-violent struggle. But even a non-violent struggle demands an army, an organization, and a machinery. India is going to be free, and that we who live today are going to play a part in making India free. There is no power on earth that can keep India enslaved anymore. Let us strive for India's freedom, one day more."
At this point of time, when Subhash Chandra Bose came to power as a president, he saw that, there was a clear distinction in his ideals and the ideals that Gandhi wanted to follow. Whereas Gandhi's ideologies were lined up, for the non-violent movements, Subhash Chandra Bose was more of a militant personality. So he was bent towards the fact that if necessary, there could be measures that could be taken which would be violent, and Subhash Chandra Bose would ultimately support it. So he was a more militant kind of a person, a more radical person, in the sense that he wanted India to involve in that military debacle as well. So we see that while Gandhi was a believer of non-violence, Subhash's ideals were a little more aggressive and militant in nature. So there was, therefore, we could see a kind of clash in the ideologies, in fact, in Congress, because Subhash Chandra Bose already was admitted to Congress at that point of time. Now, Subhash Chandra Bose also had the idea that, if India was to gain freedom, it was important for India to gain an amount of support from the international sphere as well. So international powers like that of Germany, Japan should be lending hand to India, and India should go ahead and ask for help if necessary. Now, this entire fact was not something that Gandhi, of course, liked, because Germany was a Nazi power led by Hitler at that point of time. Whereas Subhash Chandra Bose was absolutely against the fact that India should support Britishers in the war effort, or should fight for the Britishers as a colony. So he said that, to give the Britishers what they wanted would put them in a very easy spot, and that Subhash Chandra Bose did not want. In fact, because the pressures that Second World War was creating, Subhash Chandra Bose wanted to maintain that and ask for the complete independence from the Britishers. So we see that Bose was against Gandhi's decision to lend military support to the British during the Second World War. And the third is that Subhash wanted to go ahead with the process of industrialization to make clothes which would actually bring any change in the British economy, instead of the use of charkhas to produce clothes, which was not only time taking, but the production was also very limited. Now, this did not sit very well with Gandhi. So Subhash Chandra Bose looked forward to the process of industrialization, of making clothes, to bring any actual difference to British economy. So if India had to clamp down on the economy that Britishers were gaining out of their production process, then Indian production process would also have to be at par to that. Now, therefore, he stated that just depending on the charkhas would be more time taken and produce much less. The rift between Gandhi and Subhash Chandra Bose came to the forefront when the incident of the election of the presidential candidates for the next session of Congress at Tripura came up. There was clearly visible two sides. One side where Gandhi and the other supporters of Gandhi established the fact that they were backing Pattabhi Sitaramaiah as their presidential candidate. So we see that in the Congress election of 1939, Gandhi and some of the members of the working committee supported Pattabhi Sitaramaiah as their presidential candidate against Subhash. So Subhash Chandra Bose had already garnered a lot of strength in terms of the people in the Congress as well. Now, when the elections were taking place, of course, Subhash Chandra Bose got an upper hand and he won. But when Subhash Bose won these elections, it was clear that Gandhi was not happy with the outcome. And in fact, Gandhi stated that this was his personal defeat. So Subhash won the election and was re-elected as the president of INC. But because Gandhi had stated that this felt like a very personal defeat, Subhash Chandra Bose understood that this had become a very, a divisive sort of an environment and also an unhealthy environment to work in. So Subhash Bose resigned from his post on 29th April 1939. But after the resignation of Subhash Chandra Bose, he wanted to carry on with his struggle towards the independence. In order to do so, after he left the party, after he resigned from the presidential position, he formed what we known as the Forward Bloc in 3rd May 1939 as a part of the Congress. So after Subhash Chandra Bose left the presidential candidature, he found a new party within the Congress known as the Forward Bloc. And as you can see, the Forward Bloc had a very socialistic ideal as well. And this is the logo of All India Forward Bloc. So there were certain objectives that the Forward Bloc stated. The first was that the Forward Bloc worked towards the liberation of India with the help of workers, peasants and the youth and all radical organizations. So you can understand that when we state that it had a more socialistic ideology, that was clearly based upon the fact that Subhash Chandra Bose wanted to gain the mass appeal. Subhash Chandra Bose encouraged the people to join the Forward Bloc that would work towards gaining independence for India. So it also established socialism in country after attaining independence. So it aimed at establishing socialism after attaining independence. Now, how would it ideally establish socialistic characters in India after India gains independence? What were the sort of, ideas that Subhash Chandra Bose's Forward Bloc established? Was the first one that reorganization of agriculture and industry in country along the socialist lines. So ultimately, the socialist lines would mean that the capitalist modes would be removed and the workers and peasants would get an upper hand. Next was the abolishing the zamindari system or the feudal system in India. Third, introducing a new monetary and credit system. So the socialistic ideals were to be re-established in India after Indian independence and would be taken forward by the Forward Bloc. Now, at this point of time, we see that the world is already dealing with the Second World War. Now, when the world was dealing with the Second World War, Japan had been moving quickly and had gathered enough, military support where it already took various South Asian colonies which were under British, at that point of time. So we see that the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, Japan had gained so much, influence at that point of time that they were moving very close to the eastern frontiers of India, and it was essentially Japan that was closer to India when Japan had already taken Malaya, Myanmar and Singapore from the British. Now, when Japan captured the British territories in South Asia, what happened is all the Indian soldiers who were fighting for the British automatically became their prisoners of war. Now, these Indian soldiers who were fighting for the British were taken as prisoners of war by the Japanese army and automatically were taken back at that point of time to Japan. So this is where our focus changes from the nationalist grounds to the international sector.
Around this point of time, Rashbihari Bose, who was a famous freedom fighter and politician from India and was settled in Japan, was trying to arouse nationalist sentiments in Indians who were settled in the Southeast Asian regions.
Now, this was also the point of time when Rashbihari Bose realized that having a organized military, military sector, an army, would ultimately be helpful for them in this effort of independence. So Rashbihari Bose set up the Indian Independence League on the Japanese soil with the help of the Japanese government. So Rashbihari Bose established the Indian Independence League. This was the logo of Indian Independence League. Now the Indian Independence League primarily focused upon gaining mass support of the natives who were living, civilians who were living outside India and who supported the Indian independence. So the league aimed at mobilizing the Indian community in the Far East for the purpose of securing independence for India. So essentially trying to create a sort of international pressure on the British, who were at this point of time managing the Indian colony.
Rashbihari Bose met Mohan Singh, a military commander who had been captured in Malaya, and entrusted on him the responsibility of uniting the Indian prisoners of war from all the Southeast Asian colonies. Thus, on 1st September, the Indian National Army, popularly known as the Azad Hind Fauj, was formed under the command of Mohan Singh and presidentship of Rashbihari Bose. As you can see, this is Captain Mohan Singh.
So the Indian National Army that was established by Rashbihari Bose had the ideals or the objectives of unity, faith and justice. So their main principles were unity, faith and justice, and their objectives were first to organize an armed struggle against the British using modern weapons. So you can see how the scene is now moving from a national sector to an international sector, where the Indian National Army that was formed by Rashbihari Bose is trying to compete with the British with modern weapons and modern ideological base. Establishing a provisional government. So a government was to be established overseas, of course, that would have, the army organization, which was ideally the Azad Hind Fauj, which was to be the army of that provincial government, and mobilizing the armed forces to free India. So this particular army, this Indian National Army that was formed, would ultimately go ahead and free India, that is take India from the captivity of the British. Subhas Chandra Bose, who was kept in a house arrest in January, decided to elope from his Elgin Roads house. Now, how could he do that when he was kept in a house arrest? He disguised himself and eloped from his house on 17th of January. So we see he dressed himself as a Pathan and eloped. And he stayed some time in Calcutta to garner all the international support that was required for him to fight for Indian independence. So he moved first to Peshawar, then to Soviet Russia. From there he moved to Italy and then to Germany, from where he ultimately moved to Japan. So, Subhas Chandra Bose ultimately was in the international waters, and he was now trying to start the talks with the international superpowers who were already in the debacle in the Second World War. So ideally he thought that he would try to gain extended support from Germany, Japan and the Axis powers, so that they could support him in the, this entire struggle of freedom of India. So what ideally Subhash Chandra Bose did was, from Germany he took a submarine and then moved to Japan through the waters in 1943. When Subhash Chandra Bose finally reached the Japanese soil, he saw that Raj Bihari Bose had already established the Indian army for him. And once Subhash Chandra Bose reached Japan, Raj Bihari Bose handed over his presidentship to Subhash Chandra Bose, who was also given the command for the Indian National Army. So Raj Bihari Bose handed over his presidentship and military command of Indian National Army in July 1943 in a meeting which was called at Singapore. So the headquarters of INA were established in Singapore. A large number of Indian civilian population residing in Japan had also lent extensive financial and military support to INA. So INA, therefore, we understand, was able to generate an international support for itself and for the mass movement in India. Subhash Chandra Bose was hailed as Netaji by the Indian residents there and also the army. So he was declared as the leader of all in the international grounds, and Netaji now was preparing the Indian National Army to move forward to free India from the clutches of the British. Now, how did the Indian National Army exactly function? The Indian National Army under Subhash Chandra Bose had 4 brigades. The brigades were namely Gandhi, Nehru, Azad and Subhash. And these brigades had the war call of Jai Hind. Jai Hind as a war call is still used by the Indian Army till date. So we see that to motivate the army, Netaji used to chant Jai Hind or glory to India. Now, Indian National Army was also the first of its kind to have an all-woman regiment that was led by Lakshmi Swaminathan. Now, it was the first of its kind in South Asia and was established as the Rani of Jhansi regiment. So, the Indian National Army had a women regiment under Captain Lakshmi Swaminathan. So can you tell me who led the Rani of Jhansi regiment of INA? Was it Lakshmi Swaminathan, Rani Lakshmi Bai, Kalpana Datta or Pritilata Vadekar? It was the correct answer is. The correct answer is Lakshmi Swaminathan. So Subhash Chandra Bose was not only leading 85,000 Indian soldiers, but also leading the Azad Hind government, which was a provincial government that was set up in Singapore, and the Azad Hind Fauj, which was the name of INA, was under this government. So you can understand that this government was, established on the lines that this was a government overseas and had currencies and stamps, as you saw in the animation, that Subhash Chandra Bose used to constantly keep connect with the Indian grounds and Indian national movement. He also used the Azad Hind radio to constantly monitor the situation that India was in and developed his sort of methodologies and also the point of action from these essential tools that he established under the Azad Hind government. So the Japanese army at this point of time, when they are in full-fledged war in the Second World War, had already taken various islands and, as we saw, in fact, various colonies from the British. Now, after they took the Andaman and Nicobar Islands from the British power, the Japanese army decided to give the nominal power of governance to the Azad Hind government. So in 1943, the Japanese government gave the nominal authority of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands to the Azad Hind government, and the Azad Hind government renamed these islands as Sahid and Swaraj Islands respectively. So Andaman and Nicobar Islands right here were renamed by the Azad Hind government. Thus, we saw that at this point of time, the INA that was established under Netaji decided to move quickly towards India and wanted to regain the Indian soil from the British with their militaristic approach. Now, INA was, situated at Rangoon, and they established their base camp at Rangoon in Burma, which was in Myanmar. So it was here that Netaji delivered his famous speech of, "If you give me blood, I will give you freedom," to motivate his army. And this also became a marked speech by Netaji, which he brought forward to motivate the army at that point of time. So in April 1944, the INA unfurled the Indian flag for the first time. But before that happened, from Rangoon, the INA moved forward and established its control over Modak in Chittagong, and then moved for Kohima. And from Kohima, they moved towards Imphal. And finally, they reached Moirang in Manipur and established their flag on the Indian soil. So ideally, Imphal, Kohima, Moidak, Moirang and Rangoon were already under the INA, and they wanted to move forward from Imphal into the main Indian land and carry forward their mission of taking India from the British. But it was unfortunate at this point of time that due to heavy rainfall, the army could not move forward and they had to retreat to Burma. It also happened that there were heavy firing that took place at that point of time by the British, and there was a serious lack of supplies for the army, in fact, in Burma. So you can understand, without provisions, the army could not move forward in their mission. But this was only the starting of the bad omen for the Indian National Congress. This was also the point of time when Hiroshima-Nagasaki attacks had taken place over Japan, and Japan had to surrender to the Allied powers. We see that in 1945 of August, Japan had to surrender to the British and USA after the Hiroshima-Nagasaki attacks, marking an end to the World War II. The British captured Rangoon and captured most of INA soldiers as again the prisoners of war. Fatefully enough, this was also a point of time when the entire structure of INA fell, because Netaji was said to die in a plane crash in Taiwan. So it is said that on 18th of August 1945, Netaji died in Taiwan due to a plane crash.
In spite of the unsuccessful endeavors of the Indian National Congress, we cannot state it as a failure, because it was able to inculcate in the people the final dose of aggressive nationalism. Thus, we can understand that this finally led to the independence of India after 2 years, and we can state that INA's struggle therefore had a final impact on the British deciding to quit India. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly, learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it is rewarding too. So register for free now.